Welcome, everyone. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor here at Lincoln Square. So it has been 2 months since the Epstein files were supposed to be released by the Department of Justice. They didn't do that out of the goodness of their hearts, but they were actually required to by the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed by Congress. But the DOJ has not followed the law and is still withholding what we think are millions of documents. Furthermore, Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell continues to stonewall lawmakers about what else she knows, and she is currently lobbying for clemency from the President of the United States. Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury is a Democrat representing New Mexico's 1st District. She serves on both the Natural Resources and the Oversight and Accountability Committees. The Congresswoman has been a vocal advocate for Epstein survivors, and she joins us now to discuss her continued support for survivors and the accountability that they're due. Congresswoman, thank you so much for making time to join us.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
Great. Well, I wanted to start with something that you had posted on Blue Sky last week on administration officials in the Epstein files. And you list quite a few people from Donald Trump on down. Why did you decide that you wanted to post that list?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the Trump administration has been involved in a months-long cover-up of the Epstein files. And I want to start with the statement that Donald Trump made to Marjorie Taylor Greene, which is that if the files were exposed, a lot of his friends would get hurt. Probably himself as well. And so let's take the president's own statement at face value. It's very clear that the president does not want these files in the public view. He does not want Pam Bondi to investigate and to prosecute these crimes. And it's very clear that there are people in the files, including himself, that he does not want to have public attention shined on. And it doesn't matter if he wants it or not. That's what the law says. And so what has happened over the last 6 months is that the Oversight Committee subpoenaed all of the Epstein files at the end of last summer. The administration has failed to comply with the subpoena. After they failed to comply with the subpoena, we launched a bipartisan effort to pass a law that would require the administration to disclose the files. And while we were doing that, we were continuing to subpoena witnesses and files from the estate, which showed that not only the president himself, but his associates had deep ties to Jeffrey Epstein. He was threatening members of Congress. He was trying to kill the Epstein Files Transparency Act, but ultimately several members of his own party signed the discharge petition. We voted on it, it passed. And then his Department of Justice has stonewalled Congress and the public. Well, finally, we get a partial release of these files that has come in dribs and drabs over the last several months, including just 2 weeks ago, a large cache of documents, about 3 million documents were released. And because it is such a vast amount of documentation, investigations, files, paperwork, just even going through the files is going to take, I'm sure, many, many months. And we've got the entire world going through these files. But what is very clear is that inside of these files, the president was investigated by the FBI for potential sexual assault. There are multiple members of his administration that are named in various witness statements. There are multiple members of his administration that had deep ties and friendships with Jeffrey Epstein. There are members of his administration like Howard Lutnick who lied to the public and then lied to Congress about those ties. And we have the Department of Justice still refusing to comply with the law. So clearly, all of the evidence from the president's own statement to his actions is telling us that he is trying to cover up this case and to protect people that are in his orbit. And so for me, it was very important that we identify individuals in the files who have some association with the crimes that Jeffrey Epstein has committed. So just because you're in the files doesn't mean that you did something bad. And frankly, there's more people than just that list you posted from his administration who are named in the files and correspondence Epstein had with individuals. But those are people who actually had relationships with Jeffrey Epstein. Those are people who the exposure of their relationship has some sort of impact on the administration itself. So for me, this is an accountability measure for an administration that is actively breaking the law. And we have to ask the question, why? Why are they breaking the law?
So, Congressman, when the Epstein Files Transparency Act passed, overwhelmingly Republicans, Democrats signed onto it. But it seems to me that now the push for more transparency and for the Department of Justice to follow the letter of the law and to prosecute people, I'm not really hearing very much from your Republican colleagues, with the exception of Congressman Massey from Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is?
Because they're scared of Donald Trump. I mean, it really comes down to that. I mean, listen, if you look, for example, what happened with the actual passage of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, Representative Massey and Ro Khanna had filed that bill and had asked for it to be put on the floor. The speaker controls the floor. Not only would the speaker not put it on the floor, if you recall, we had a government shutdown at the time, and he refused to swear in Adelita Grijalva, who had publicly committed to signing a discharge petition to get the bill to the floor to force the speaker's hand. And I think it is widely understood that the reason why the speaker did that is because Donald Trump didn't want this bill to make it to the floor. And meanwhile, he was calling members of Congress, yelling at them. We know that because Marjorie Taylor Greene told us that. She's told the world that. Somebody close to Lauren Boebert told me that, the infamous meeting in which she was called to the White House to try to force her to take her name off the discharge petition, that she was brought into a room and yelled at by Trump administration officials. They're scared of Donald Trump because he is actively intimidating members of Congress and threatening them. He's telling people, I'm not going to support you. I'm going to go after you. His retaliation to Lauren Boebert is that he vetoed a bipartisan water bill that's going to provide water to thousands of Coloradans. Like, this dude is engaged in straight up gangster behavior. So people are afraid of him. But in addition to that, and for me, this is part of what feels inexcusable, is that people are electorally afraid of Donald Trump because they believe he still controls the electorate. Look at Thomas Massey. He is engaged in the fight of his life in a primary right now, and Donald Trump and his billionaire buddies are spending millions of dollars to try to take Thomas Massey out. Why? Over the Epstein files. So, the president has made no attempts to try to cover up that he does not want this out there, and he is willing to go to any length to intimidate Republican members of Congress to suppress the information that's in these files.
So we know that the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, clearly seems to follow Trump in lockstep. But we do have the midterm elections coming up. If Democrats do take control of the chamber, what can we expect to see in terms of accountability and oversight of this administration for the Epstein files, but for the administration as a whole?
Well, let me just say this. We don't have to wait till the midterms. The founding fathers actually created Congress before they ever created the presidency, because in the wake of the abuses of King George, the reason why the United States fought a revolution and got our independence was because of the abuse of executive power. And when the founding fathers created our country, they didn't even create the presidency until years after they created Congress, because they were afraid of abuse of executive power. And that's why Congress's job is to represent the people, to hold the administration accountable, and to ensure that there is not abuse of the public. That is literally how our country was founded. And what is going on right now with my Republican colleagues, and part of why I think it's important to continue to hold them accountable, to call their offices, to hold them publicly accountable as I'm interacting with them, is that this is their job. The President of the United States is breaking the law. And even if they're afraid of them, what is the point of holding public office if you can't do your most basic constitutional duty and uphold the law and stay accountable to your oath in office? And so I do think that in addition to Thomas Massey, a number of my Republican colleagues especially as they've seen the redacted versions of these files, are so appalled and disgusted by what this administration is covering up that the dam is breaking loose. I know that Nancy Mace has been very vocal the last few weeks, Lauren Boebert, Representative Luna from Florida. People who are going and viewing these files are just disgusted by what they're seeing. And so I hope that my colleagues will do the right thing before the midterms. But certainly, once the midterms come here, if we are able to flip the House and flip the Senate, you better bet that we're going to hold this president accountable not only for the cover up in this case, but for the countless other illegal actions that this administration has been undertaking, from mass firings to illegal impoundment of federal funds, violations of constitutional and due process rights and immigration enforcement, illegally deporting American citizens. I mean, we got a lot of material to work with.
Mhm. Would you vote to impeach the president?
100%. I don't even have to hesitate. I think he should be impeached now.
So yesterday I spoke with Jess Michaels, who is an Epstein survivor who's been on the front lines of this fight. She said that she and some other survivors have been invited to attend the president's State of the Union address next week. I was wondering, are you planning to meet with survivors again while they're in DC? And have you invited someone to be your guest?
Yeah, myself and a handful of members of Congress are working very closely with the survivors to help facilitate their presence at the State of the Union. And so there, as I understand, I think there'll be about a half dozen survivors there. And not only will we be meeting with and helping them attend, we intend to also do counter programming to talk about the Epstein files and to talk about justice for the survivors. So it will be a key focus for us on Tuesday.
I think the photo, and I think we have this, of Pam Bondi testifying before the House and refusing 3 times to even turn around and acknowledge survivors, presence, just their very personhood. That seems to me to be the lasting image of what that hearing was. As a member of Congress, what was your perspective on her performance, and what did you take away from that?
Yeah, I was just talking to somebody about this. There's the institutional and legal aspects of it, which is that obviously Pam Bondi is at the center of covering up the Epstein files. She, I believe, has actively perjured herself in front of Congress, including in that hearing. I think she should be held accountable. I think she should probably ultimately also be impeached for her behavior and held in contempt of Congress. But there's an aspect of that moment and her continued refusal during that hearing to acknowledge the survivors, to even dignify with answers to the committee members what she is doing to seek justice as a woman, that really, I think, cut to my core, in which I think that picture really affected a lot of people. And, for me, I think about, there are very few women who have not experienced some sort of sexual assault, improper behavior, or a moment where they were made to feel powerless in society or somewhere. And so I don't know how a woman could refuse to even acknowledge the humanity of women who have spent decades of their lives seeking justice for the most vile, egregious sexual exploitation that we have ever heard of in the history of this country. I don't know what you're made of morally, ethically, spiritually, that you cannot acknowledge the humanness of other women who have suffered at the hands of not only a predator, but the government itself. And so I think that image will not only live on as a political moment and a legal moment for our country, but a moral moment for this administration, who refused to dignify the basic humanity of survivors. And I think you add that to the picture of, the 5-year-old who was deported from Minneapolis, you add that to the images of um, Alex Preddy, being murdered in the streets. That is what I think this administration will be remembered for, is their complete lack of humanity and cruelty coupled with the lawlessness. And I think that will be one of the defining moments.
So we have that very powerful and disturbing image of Pam Bondi. But last week, Ghislaine Maxwell, who was, a co-conspirator of Epstein, she was also on the Hill to give a congressional deposition, which you were present for. But instead, she just pleaded the fifth. And so we weren't even treated to any answers. I wanted to know how you felt in that hearing, and what are your thoughts about the fact that she has just very nakedly been lobbying for a pardon or for clemency from President Trump?
Yeah, well, I want to just clarify that she was subpoenaed by our bipartisan committee to testify in front of Congress, and she zoomed in from the federal prison camp where she was moved by the Trump administration mysteriously after she met with Todd Blanche, the president's personal defense attorney, who's now at DOJ. We don't know what private conversations were had when she was moved to that lower security camp. But, the thing that was particularly peculiar in that deposition, and then her attorney followed up and made this statement public, is that she was not only campaigning for clemency, she was essentially telling us through her attorney that if the president pardons her, she will exonerate him. And so to me, she is not just campaigning for her clemency, she is selling her silence. She is selling the exoneration of the president. And here's what we know. First and foremost, that woman should never step out of jail. I mean, she is a convicted sex trafficking felon, period, end of story. She not only was a co-conspirator, she was one of the primary figures who actively recruited minors from high schools, from Trump's Mar-a-Lago spa. I mean, she is a convicted sex offender, and she was present. And I also think it's interesting that in her appeal to the president, because it's clear that message wasn't for us, that message was for the president. She's saying, Donald Trump, you give me a pardon, I'll tell the world that you weren't there. How does she know he wasn't there? The files say he was, because I have viewed the files, and the FBI did investigate the president for potential sexual assault of a minor. And there are multiple cases. We know they were friends. His own chief of staff, Susie Wiles, says that they were playboys together. So, clearly she is not a credible witness. She perjured herself in her own trial.
Right. I feel like that has been glossed over. I mean, she lied under oath, and this was proven. So she's clearly not a credible witness for anything.
Yeah. I mean, I guess none of it surprises me. And I'd be curious what the survivors have to say. I don't think any of it surprises us. These people are criminals. They evaded justice for decades. It continues.
So at this point, most of us are familiar with Epstein's Island, but there's actually a location in your home state that has come to the forefront in recent weeks, Zorro Ranch. And there has been very little investigation about what went on there. And I'm wondering if you could tell us why that is, and if we might be able to finally see some transparency and justice about what went on there.
Yeah. Well, New Mexico was one of many locations where Jeffrey Epstein had estates. But what is particularly peculiar about his New Mexico estate at Zorro Ranch is that it was never fully investigated by the FBI. Every single other major property where known survivors had given victim statements about being sexually abused had search warrants issued, and the FBI actually investigated those properties. But for an unknown reason, New Mexico's Zorro Ranch was never investigated. And just 2 days ago, the state legislature became the first state here in New Mexico in the country to pass state legislation to launch a truth commission to investigate the property, to investigate the crimes that occurred here in New Mexico, and to get to the bottom of why state and local police and law enforcement authorities did not follow up on investigating those crimes, and why the FBI did not follow up on investigating those crimes. It's notable that Jeffrey Epstein purchased that property in 1993, and there was already a complaint to the FBI by 1996 of sexual assault. And it's one of the known survivors. She's told her story publicly, but there were multiple allegations that were taken to the FBI of witness statements. And there are other redacted files, which I viewed in the Epstein files at DOJ 2 weeks ago, that show that there were other even greater and potentially more chilling crimes committed at that property. And so part of this investigation is to not only understand and piece together a full understanding of the crimes themselves and to prosecute them if there are individuals who can be prosecuted for them, but to understand how Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell escaped the justice system and why our own law enforcement here in New Mexico did not ultimately pursue these cases. And because we know that they knew they were happening. And so, that's why it's a truth commission. And this House committee that just passed our legislature will have subpoena power, and they've already launched as of yesterday. So it's a really important piece of the puzzle. And I think for New Mexicans, it's also about making sure that our people are safe. Was part of the reason why these crimes allowed to happen in New Mexico because there were legal loopholes, because he exploited our political system, because people shielded him. We want to really understand how we make sure that this can never happen again here.
I'm wondering, because we know that the Department of Justice seems to have very little interest in pursuing a more thorough investigation. Obviously, Trump's FBI has demonstrated that as well. Are there some more avenues on the state level for more investigations in New Mexico and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on the crime and it depends on the statute of limitations. But what I can tell you about New Mexico is that even the narrow set of files that I have viewed unredacted, we know that there were multiple allegations that were never fully investigated and not fully prosecuted. And so some of those cases may fall within statute of limitations, some may not. Part of what we're doing is also seeking to extend the statute of limitations on sexual assault and violence here in New Mexico so that not only those crimes, but other crimes can be prosecuted. But I encourage other states where we know crimes were committed, including New York and Florida and other authorities like the Virgin Islands, to also do the same, because they have power over their own destinies. And if the U.S. Department of Justice is going to fail to act, I think that is our responsibility as leaders to pursue every avenue of justice we can at the state and local level.
Before we let you go, I did want to just touch on a couple other things. Next week, there is Trump's State of the Union address. I'm sure he'll be telling us just how hot the country is. That seems to be a theme for him. But a lot of people really are, I'm sure your constituents and elsewhere, are feeling the pain of this economy with his tariffs and the cost of living. What do you expect to hear from him in that address? And what will Democrats' message be about it?
Well, he's such a chaotic human being. I never try to predict what'll come out of Donald Trump's mouth. Who the heck knows?
Right.
What I can say is that, for the last several weeks, we've seen the White House trying to get him on message,
Mm.
trying to get him to talk about the economy. But you can't lie to the American people and gaslight them and tell them the economy is doing fine when the vast majority of Americans can't afford their rent, can't afford their mortgages, can't afford to put gas in the car, can't afford to buy groceries, and prices are just going up and up and up. So, I expect that he will try to spin the economy, but I think that our message to the American people is that we are here fighting for our democracy. We are fighting to address the fundamental needs of our communities, to make sure that every single person in this country has dignity, has meaningful work, can afford a cost of living that is not just allow them to survive, but to thrive and to grow and to build wealth. And that we have a country of laws and a country where our people can feel safe on the streets. And so our message is really about addressing the needs of our country and our communities, about addressing the cost of living, about addressing basic human dignity, and about defending our democracy. So I don't know what the president's going to talk about. Who knows? But I think his actions speak louder than any word that could come out of his mouth. And what we've seen over the last year is a complete lawlessness and destruction of the rule of law, our economy, and just basic human dignity in this country. And I think the American people are sick of it.
There have been reports that House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries has been urging members not to protest Trump, like some of the things that we've seen from your Republican colleagues while Democratic presidents have been in office. Barack Obama, Joe Biden, they both faced protests during some of their State of the Union speeches. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, especially given what Trump's first year has been in office, where we've seen killings from ICE. We've seen stonewalling on the Epstein files. We've seen just vile conditions at Dilley and other detention centers for immigrants. Things that weren't protests. But is that the right forum for it?
There are many forms of resistance, and resistance can take many different manifestations. For me, last year, my resistance was to hold up a sign to say, not only to the country, but to the world, that this is not normal. And, I like to say it was my SOS to the world, and it was heard across the world. And I have no regrets about doing that, because I think it was a moment in which people needed to have their own deep-seated feelings about what was going on validated, and also to see members of Congress taking active resistance in the halls of Congress in front of the president. I think that, the leadership in the House views this as a forum where we want to have a clear message, where we want to maintain a certain integrity in the institution, and where we don't want to become the story as the president is acting out of control. So I think that that's how they're approaching this moment. But I do think personally that for every person, whether you're a member of Congress or you're a member of the public, we all need to engage in acts of resistance, to use our voices, to use the spaces we move in, to speak loudly, to speak clearly, and to say that we are not okay with what's happening. And so, we don't know what's going to happen that night, but I expect that there will be members who use their voices.
Congresswoman, thank you for taking time to speak with us today. I really appreciate you coming by, and I hope that we can talk with you again in the future.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you.